my mother was a bit of a strange woman. She was always a bit obsessive over certain things all throughout my childhood, and it definitely made growing up a bit awkward. There were a few things that she would be disruptively obsessed with that I never understood. When she did laundry, the clothes that came out of the dryer needed to be folded and put in drawers or closets right away. We never had baskets for clean clothes. Dishes were never to sit in the sink for more than the time it took to eat a meal, ever. We were expected to wash them, dry them, and put them away immediately. The dog needed to be walked at exactly 6:30 p.m., and we were to walk down the street in one direction and then back, and the walk needed to be over by 7:15 p.m. She was a strict woman, and us kids were always put to the test when it came to living in our childhood home. We were always trying to do what she wanted us to do, but it felt like the list of rules and guidelines by which we were expected to live was ever expanding. Using the computer was strictly timed. Our toys needed to be put in the provided bins in our rooms. Our clothes should be hung up and organized by color, or sorted into specific drawers. Not a single thing was to be out of line or out of place, and she would check. Oh Lord, would she check. Us three kids knew that when we did something, we needed to make sure that it was done right. We almost had a system in place where we would peer review our chores. I would do the dishes, and then my older sister, Samantha, would make sure that they were done right before Mom could do her routine verifications. Billy would hang his clothing up in the closet, and then I would come in and scrutinize his work. Samantha would sweep and mop the tile floor, and Billy would come in behind her just to make sure that every single inch was spotless. Needless to say, we had the cleanest house in the entire neighborhood. No, more like the entire damn state. But there was one thing that my mother always did that was weird to me. Well, weirder than forcing us to live by her obsessive rules. It was the one thing that seemed to be almost in opposition to her perfectionist attitude. She would always make us leave a light on. Now, that may not sound too strange to some. Maybe leaving a light on in the hallway to help people that get up in the middle of the night see where they're going, or maybe leave the kitchen light on downstairs for whatever reason. But it wasn't like that. When she told us to leave a light on, it was in every single room, every single night. I had a small lamp on my writing desk that I had to keep on. Samantha had a light on her fish tank that Mom glued into the on position, and Billy had a ceiling light in his closet that Mom turned on and cut the pull string so that he couldn't turn it off. With how much of a perfectionist she was, you would think that she would want the lights off at night, that she would want to make sure the house was dark in every room, that we all slept like we were supposed to. But that wasn't the case. She would leave the light on above the stove every night, leave the lamp on in the living room, make sure that the small plug-in nightlights were on in the hallway, and even went as far as installing a secondary light in the bathroom that was wired to a switch in her bedroom. Obviously, this made going to bed a very awkward process. She would tell us that it was bedtime and we would all march together through each room, making sure there was a light on, and we would split off one by one to bed with everyone saying goodnight together until my mom went to a room by herself and shut her door. We all had doors to our rooms, but she never let us shut them overnight. We had to leave them at least part of the way open. It was a bit of a double standard that she could close her door, but we couldn't. It was just another pain of growing up with her. What was even more strange, at least to me, was the fact that none of us really questioned this process, nor did any of us try to deviate from it, with only one exception. I remember one year when Samantha was in her rebellious teenage years. There was one night where she had, apparently, unplugged the lights to her fish tank so that her room was completely dark. At some point, my mother had come out of her room for whatever reason and noticed that her room was dark. The scene that played out that night, well, let's just say that I've never seen my mother so distressed over anything in my entire life. My mother may have been a strict woman, but that was the only time I had ever heard her raise her voice. Being obsessive-compulsive, it's easy to imagine how she would have reacted to this thing being out of line with everything else. She obviously would be unhappy, upset, and probably overreact a bit. She went way beyond that, though. It was as if this action had destroyed her mental state and thrown her into a full-blown chaotic panic attack. She yelled, screamed, cried, and tore into my sister for more than an hour. But what she was saying made little to no sense. I remember very specifically the concerns that she voiced. She repeatedly voiced the concern of what would happen if she had died. Now, my mother never spoke with myself or Billy about mortality, but I guess Samantha was different because she was the oldest? When my mother yelled this at my sister, her demeanor changed from rebellious teen to one that almost looked sympathetic. She no longer wanted to argue her position, but instead just conceded that my mother was right, and she apologized all the while my mother kept demeaning and aggressively chastising her for turning the light off. I never understood the connection between my sister turning off her light and the random possibility of my mother passing away in the night. It never made any sense to me, and as much as I wanted to ask Samantha what it was all about, I just couldn't seem to do so. Something about how she shifted from this angry and disobedient teenager to almost submissive and apologetic told me that this wasn't something that should be brought up in passing conversation. And that was the only time that one of us ever fell out of compliance with my mother's requests. And it was the only time that she ever became this aggressive with any of us. She would punish us if we did get out of line or didn't do something to her standards, sure, but again, she was always calm and collected about it, with only that one exception. As time went on, it almost seemed like this conversation weighed heavily on my sister, and the moment that she turned 18, she was quick to get her own place and leave the house. That day that she packed all of her things into her car and was about to be on her way to her new home, it was a painful one. The goodbyes between my mother and sister were very short. And as my sister was sitting in her car with the engine idling, about to pull out of the driveway one last time, my mother walked over to the window. She leaned down, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Remember, Samantha, always leave a light on." My sister's look of joy once more faded to that look of melancholy, and she nodded in agreement and then left. I never saw her again after that, which most people would look at as a sad thing, but to me, it just meant that she needed to get away. I have no idea where she is now, how her life is going, or what she's been doing, but I do know that 12 years is a long time to not speak to someone. When I turned 18, I also moved out of the house, but I moved into a small apartment just down the street. I couldn't bring myself to leave my mother, no matter how strict she was, and my brother behind like Samantha had. My mother gave me the same lecture about leaving a light on when I moved out as well, and I agreed to it. And since it had been so ingrained in my brain over the years, it wasn't really that hard to keep doing it. After a couple of years, though, I started to feel like it was such a silly thing for me to do. I was 20. I lived on my own. I was forming my own life and relationships, and I didn't really understand why I had to continue following these pointless requests of my mentally unstable mother. So, one weekend, I drove back to my mother's house and I asked if she and I could have a talk. She was a bit nervous at first, that much was obvious, but after a bit of convincing, I finally just blurted it out. I asked her in a direct manner, "What's with the lights?" She asked me what I meant, and I kind of let loose. She knew what I meant. She knew exactly what I was talking about. So, I was a bit upset with the question. I asked her why we were all expected to leave the lights on. Why she was so dead set on forcing us to keep our rooms lit up every single night. I expected her to get mad, but she didn't. I expected her to berate me and give me that same angry lecture she gave my sister so many years ago. But again, she didn't. She sat on her bed and she looked me dead in the eyes and told me the truth. Or what she said was the truth. My mother sat there and told me that she was cursed. That she had made a deal with someone, and because of her curse, the three of us were also cursed. And she said that when she died, we would all be hunted by the same demonic presence that had bound itself to her, and that it could only live in the dark. If there was light, this being wouldn't be able to get to us. And because of that, we all had to keep our lights on. This whole time, for 20 years of my life, I was doing something that was feeding into my mother's mental illness. She was clearly crazy, and we were all just going with it. Of course, it never occurred to me that her demands were because of a supposed demon coming to get us. I always thought it was weird, but then after a while I considered that she may have gone through some kind of childhood trauma, and maybe it messed with her to the point that she struggled to cope with certain things. It would even explain the obsessive-compulsive issues, so I kind of thought that it explained that, too. But no. Instead, she was just delusional. I couldn't take it anymore, and I told her that I was leaving, and that I wouldn't be coming back. She didn't even try to stop me. She didn't tell me that she knew it sounded crazy. She didn't tell me to be careful. She simply said okay and motioned that she was fine with me leaving. After this conversation, a lot of things made sense. Her issues, her compulsions, why my sister left and decided that she never wanted to come back. Cutting off contact was the best thing to do for our sake. And I will admit, that is what I did. I stopped talking to her altogether. I wasn't going to feed into whatever problems she had. And while some people may claim that I was being selfish or that I was going about it wrong, well, yeah, maybe I was, but after 20 years, there is only so much that you can take. I kept in touch with my brother and very rarely said hi to her. But it was pretty much a no-contact situation. Now, this whole thing happened about 3 years ago, and since then, I have created my own life, and I've gone my own way. I stopped indulging myself in my mother's delusions. I stopped sleeping with the light on, and I let my apartment get messy. Not gross, but messy enough that it made me comfortable. And maybe I was being shallow, but having a bit of clutter, well, it was nice after spending my whole life in a spotless house. As mentioned, I still kept in touch with Billy, but I did my own thing as far as living was concerned. I even bought blackout curtains to keep my room dark in the daytime, and at night, it was so dark that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Better yet, nothing ever happened to me, which proved to me that all of this was a farce. Today, however, things have felt a bit off. On my way home from work, there was a major delay on the highway. Apparently, a car had gone over the embankment, and it was a pretty major crash. It caused my 10-minute drive to take an hour as the emergency crews tried to lift the car out of the ditch. And it was pretty clearly a big deal, as they all looked rather distraught. It was an annoyance, sure, but I more so felt pity for whoever was in the car, and of course their family. When I did get home, it was already getting dark, and I wasn't really hungry, so I just went straight to my bedroom and decided to play a video game for a couple of hours before passing out. At some point, I noticed that an unknown number had called my phone and left me a voicemail, which was a strange occurrence for sure, but also not unheard of. I've gotten enough calls from people trying to extend my car warranty to know that it was probably some BS scammer. There was also a missed call from my mother, but I wasn't in the mood to talk to her at all, so I just dismissed the notification and moved on. Around 9, I decided that I was going to turn in for the night. I'd played over a dozen rounds of my game, and I was starting to get to the point that I was frustrated each time I lost, which meant that I was getting tired. I was the type to always get into a bad mood the more tired I got, so I knew that it was time to shut it off and sleep. So I did. Or, I tried to. But the whole time that I laid there with my eyes closed, I couldn't help but shake that weird feeling in my mind. Something was telling me that I had forgotten to do something. That there was something that I needed to do right at that moment, and that it was critical that I do it. I tried to ignore the feeling, I tried to cover my head and just sink into sleep, but my brain just would not let me. After a few minutes, something clicked. I remembered the voicemail. Was that it? Was the voicemail from the unknown number the thing that was bothering me so badly? I grabbed my phone and turned on the screen and then dialed into my voicemail. It mentioned that I had 2 messages waiting for me, so I pressed play. The first message was from the unknown number. It was some guy that I didn't know. "Hi, this is Officer Jonathan Rogers. We're trying to reach you about an accident that happened earlier today. If you could please call us back at..." He rambled off the number to call, much to my confusion. Once the message ended, the next one started to play. The voice in this message was much more familiar, though its tone was calm and warm. It was my mother. She sounded happy, almost like something had happened that put her in an incredibly joyous mood. The message was simple. "I wanted to call you to let you know that I love you, and I forgive you. I know someday you'll understand what I went through, and you'll understand what I said to you. Until then, my dear son, leave a light on." As obvious as it may seem from the outside, I was slow to piece together the puzzle that was put in front of me, mostly because I didn't have time to really think it through. As the message ended, and I hung up from calling my voicemail, I locked my screen and tossed my phone onto the floor, and then just stared up at my ceiling, lost in thought. I stared into the absolute darkness that was my room, and I slowly connected the dots. However, as I was starting to put everything together, I noticed something strange about the shadows that covered the ceiling of my room. Something that almost felt like movement. My tired eyes tried their best to absorb the darkness and create an image for my brain to identify. But the blackness started to move, to pull down towards me, as the room felt like it was spinning. Then, as the shape slowly fell towards my face, as my brain started plotting out the 3-dimensional points of whatever I thought I was seeing, a few things crossed my mind. The first of which was maybe my mother wasn't as crazy as I thought she was. Maybe she had a point. And maybe there are things out there in the darkness that we don't realize. The second thought was, I really hope that whatever those glowing red eyes belong to doesn't see me. So this, my friends, was Leave a Light On, written and narrated by me, as the Raven Dreams. Or Raven Adams, or Raven Pasta, whatever you want to call me, doesn't really matter. You can call me whatever you want, as long as you don't call me late to dinner. Anyways, yeah. This story, for those that are curious, was based on the fear of darkness. That was the intent on this one. This is the second of the phobia stories that I've written. The first one was A Matter of Self-Control. Wrote that one back in September, this one back in October, and yeah. I want to write more phobia stories, and I probably will eventually. But unfortunately, this is the last thing that I've written since, I don't know since what, but this is the last thing I've written, and I haven't had time to write much lately. After this, actually, this was right after I had COVID. So, I mean, between then and now, I've just been so stressed and not doing well. So, hey, you got a story out of me on Raven Pasta, because it's from October, and I should probably get it out. So, if you enjoyed the story, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, hit the subscribe button. You can also leave me a comment letting me know what you thought, or if you have any phobias you want me to try to write a story on, let me know. I would like to give it a shot. I need to write more stories, and phobias are fun to write stories on, so there's that. And of course, if you're new to this channel and think this is my only channel, well, you're sadly mistaken. There is also the As the Raven Dreams channel, where I do all my true stories, a much larger channel, a much more active channel, one that you should definitely subscribe to, so go check that out. Yeah. All that said, friends, hope you're having a beautiful day. Hope you have a gorgeous week. I hope I see you on the next video, whenever that happens to be. And of course, until then, my friends, you are loved, you're valid, you're important. The best you that you can be, never let anyone tell you otherwise, and until I see you again, sleep well.